it isn't the great and mighty Kevin?
How do you have this? I am killing you with my powerful wizard gun!
This purveyor of mad and drivel, which is my new favourite phrase, is the great and mighty Kevin Wetsworth. From the internet series Hunter the Parenting, hosted on the YouTube channel Bruva Alphabusa, made by the production team Ogre Papanang, and based on the World of Darkness intellectual property. If you aren't familiar with World of Darkness, to sum it up briefly,
vampires are real. Sorry you had to find out about it this way.
cheers Irish. Though to be fair, it's a bit more complicated than that. There are also demons that loved humanity too much, mages which can alter the universe with their minds until the reality cops show up, pocket dimensions, Assassin's Creed vampires, actual, literal Satan, eco-terrorist werewolves, look, I have done an analysis of this series before, specifically on the character of Big D, which I recommend checking out if you want a bit more information on this world of madness.
The setting is off its shit!
Right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, Hunter the Parenting has a lot of characters. A reckless scholar, an inflexible wall, an adorable child who is a magnet for the most horrific things imaginable, an exhausted Irish
Magic Man.
a mega goth, and a mega weeb.
Oh god, it's shot! Six paddle away!
It's a yowie paddle, Uke boy!
Weeb just came out of left field to call her ex a bottom. The entire series is a masterfully produced work of art in just about every aspect of its production, from its storylines to its animations to its tone to its comedic timing and everything outside and in between. But there are three things that ultimately make Hunter the Parenting stand out in my opinion. The three things that kept bringing me back despite my utter lack of knowledge on World of Darkness as a property, and got me so interested that I went out of my way to learn far more about the property to the point where I can now vaguely follow what the hell is going on at any given time. Maybe. Those are the writing, the dialogue, and the characters. The series' writing is phenomenal, well-paced, tense, and genuinely scary at times, but also light-hearted and darkly comedic in ways that you'd think would contradict one another but actually work together incredibly well. The dialogue is densely packed, hysterical, and extremely good at conveying both important information about the world but also at characterizing the cast. The absolutely incredible voice acting does wonders for this point too, it must be said. And then you have the characters, where points 1 and 2 combine to create a cast of quirky, absurd, but deeply relatable, understandable, and human characters. And one of my favourite aspects about the characters of this series is that they are just that, deeply human. A lot of them fall into archetypes or have personality quirks, but they aren't just limited to them. None of them are any one thing. For example, Grimmel is a character who embodies a certain type of anime fan from the early 2000s. The kind of person that would unironically call herself an otaku without any real understanding of the cultural weight that word would have in the country she's decided to obsess over. But she's also someone who genuinely cares about her friends, and with deep regrets about how her relationship with Kitten went, clearly still has feelings for him, but regardless, the main thing she wants is for him to just be happy, but is terrible at conveying that in a way that he can understand or accept. Giles is first introduced as little more than a henchman to Brock Slackjaw, but we later see him working a job he hates and gets no respect at, to the point where even after Dee basically screws with him, he's still willing to go out of his way to help Dee out on 2 separate occasions, despite him being nothing but a nuisance while he was there, for no reason other than that Dee was nice to him. And Brock is introduced as nothing more than a hooligan who harasses Marcus and his friends, but is described by Dee as having potential throughout Chapter 4, and seems to be quite competent at his job at head of security for the Yarmouth Chapter House. Chorus of strangulation aside, in total fairness, Dee and his crew did break in, and he's shown to be observant at recognizing when Occam had been missing. His main weakness is shown that he doesn't think for himself all that much and is very deferential to his father's wishes. And Dee is the archetype of someone who is on the surface borderline insane with no real rhyme or reason to any of his actions. But in reality, his absurdity hides a man who clearly knows what he's doing, who has vast quantities of knowledge, but is still prone to making mistakes when it comes to dealing with those closest to him. But those mistakes are informed by the vast knowledge that he has and the desire to protect them. But a standout amongst all of them is Kevin. Kevin is, without question, my absolute favourite character within Hunter the Parenting, bar none. The only ones who even come close are Grimmel and Dee, and I am far from the only person who has a particular affinity for this psoriasis-laden man. Throughout its first arc, Kevin only made a physical appearance in 4, arguably 5 episodes out of a 13-episode arc. Of this, he appeared in 1 scene in Adorable Family Trip, 1 scene in Dee's Guide to Avoiding Arrest, and 1 short. His debatable appearance is in the Blender Crusade corporate villainy when Dee occasionally hears Kevin's voice in his head. He makes his only full-length appearance in The Probing of Kevin. So let's be charitable here and include the entire scene in which he appears in the first episode, and not just his actual screen time, and also count his lines from the Blender Crusade. If you remove all of the credits from the episodes, the first arc of Hunter the Parenting ends up at 6 hours and 30 minutes. Kevin appears in 58 minutes and 48 seconds of it, 33 minutes and 58 seconds of which come from the Probing of Kevin alone, less than a sixth of the total runtime of the arc. But that is all the time it took for him to become a fan favourite. If I had to pick a single word to describe Kevin... Okay, if I had to pick one word to describe him, it would be hysterical, but if I had to pick a second word, it would be that same one that I used to describe so many others in the series. Human. And that is an odd choice of words for Kevin, because Kevin is a vampire. Not only that, he self-identifies as an evil vampire wizard, and before he met the family of hunters, he was part of a group which, putting things politely for the time being, is not exactly open to the concept of humanity. He's a character built off of multiple ironies, many of them due to sheer circumstance and bad luck on his part, of which he had no real say in. And when given the chance, and the inspiration to believe that he can, he steps away from it all. In doing so, he becomes not only a representative of the duality inherent to vampires in this setting, he becomes a near-perfect example of what I would consider to be a celebration of the everyday, normal, mundane world. And that makes him the perfect kind of character for a series set in such a bleak yet absurd universe as the World of Darkness. In this analysis, I want to go over why I adore Kevin so much, why he's such a standout character within the series, and why so many of us are enraptured by him. But I also want to talk about him on a bit of a deeper level, because I think to many Kevin is little more than the ha-ha funny words vampire man, which he is, don't get me wrong, but I think that there is more to him than that. And to really figure that out, you need to look at him and everything surrounding him in a bit more depth. Analysing Kevin in this way is a tricky thing though. Topics like politics, philosophy, and morality are essential to understanding what makes him work. And he's not a character like Dee, where how he stands in opposition to the themes of the setting are what make him work. At least, not right away. Which means I'm going to have to go into them here, and that could get uncomfortable at times, so consider this your one warning. But mostly, I just want to talk about one of my favourite characters from a series that I adore, so let's delve right in, shall we?
Don't you dare turn me into a marketable plushy mortal!
Kevin's introduction to the series is what you would expect from an average creature in this setting, albeit significantly sillier. When he's first introduced alongside the rest of his pack in Chapter 1, Kevin establishes himself as arguably the biggest threat to the family of hunters. On the surface, he doesn't really look like much, especially when he's put next to the rest of his pack. Frankly speaking, he looks ridiculous, and he acts equally as daft. He's nowhere near as intimidating as Grangel Ape Boy over here, or Pyotr, who is just nightmare fuel, and compared to their bearded Bryker Bro Bruja Buddy Boy who is built like a goddamned combat Humvee, Kevin appears to be particularly scrawny. I do feel the need to point out as well, him dressing up like a wizard is not something any of the vampire clans do. That is a him thing. Why specifically he feels the need to do this is thoroughly beyond me. It is dumb, it is nonsense, and I love it. But his bizarre fashion sense aside, what he does have that sets him distinctly apart from the others are his supernatural abilities. Namely, as a Tremere, he has access to certain supernatural abilities that his clan can use, with which he can dominate other people's minds and suppress their will, leaving them unable to move or resist him in any way, unless they have countermeasures in place to deal with it. Unfortunately for him, he's up against the Golden Goose Gang, so they do have countermeasures to deal with it. He ends up captured and taken back to the Hunter's residence, where he's held hostage and interrogated by Dee. First things first though, when it comes to Kevin, and reason number one why Kevin is such a favourite, he has the best lines, and the best delivery of any character in this show.
To suck up your liquids and then piss them out over the deflated balloon that will be your remains!
That is so funny, oh my god. Fuck! Where do you get all of this?
I am an accountant! Do you know how much I hate mankind?
Kevin, stop. I can't take it. My lungs. Please have mercy. Other than that, the first impressions of Kevin are that, ridiculousness aside, he is fully capable of backing his absurdity with his actions. That he is this inhumane monster with extremely powerful abilities beyond the comprehension of the mundane. Even when next to the other vampires that surround him, which are both terrifying and very capable of kicking the living crap out of the hunters, none of them can do anything even close to what Kevin can. Pyotr can blend into his environment, but that isn't even the same ballpark of what Kevin is capable of. After the family has dealt with the other 3 packmates, you might be tempted to, just for a moment, think that this is the worst that vampires can get. And then Kevin comes out of right field to inform you that no, they can get much worse, you idiot! He's just this whole other fiend, which serves as both an indicator for how absurd this world can get, how powerful the things that hide in the dark are, and also the family's competency at hunting down these creatures. Because the moment that they understand what they're dealing with and get an opening, they're able to counter him pretty easily. All of this comes together for a very effective introductionary episode, of which Kevin plays a major part of pulling off. Following up from that, in the phenomenal The Probing of Kevin, which is one of my absolute favourite pieces of Hunter the Parenting, Dee utilizes the real-world extremely effective interrogation tactic of just kind of vibing with Kevin and developing a rapport with him in order to make him more comfortable with talking about himself, his life, and how he ended up with his pack. Kevin was embraced into the clan Tremere, one of the most authoritarian and hierarchical vampire clans, which is itself part of a social organization made up of multiple clans known as a sect. This sect was the Camarilla. The Camarilla are an extremely traditional sect which focus on maintaining the status quo of vampire society, and due to that, a lot of its structure reflects the feudal era of Dark Age Europe. Now, the Tremere are bastards, frankly. Their entire clan hierarchy is dominated by what they call the pyramid. One of the tools that they use to keep their members in line is something called a blood bond. Essentially, they forcefully addict members to vampire blood and then brainwash them in order to turn them into obedient and unflinchingly loyal thralls to their sires or a superior within the clan. The way that Kevin describes the blood bond is that there's a voice in your head constantly gaslighting you, telling you that any feelings of animosity that you may have towards your sire are repellent and disgusting, until you just accept that, and become utterly devoted to your sire, however brutal or abusive they are towards you. That sire or superior is then in turn blood bonded to someone higher up in the pyramid, and so on until it reaches the heads of the clan. So basically, Kevin was brought into a strict hierarchy within a strict hierarchy. Wonderful. Throughout his interrogation with Dee, we also learned that he's a 9th generation vampire, and how that works is, to oversimplify things, the closer to the 1st generation you are, the more absurdly powerful you get. Being a 9th generation makes him relatively powerful in comparison to many modern vampires. It gave him the most potent generational blood of his pack at the very least. But even with that power, he's still utterly subservient to the pyramid. It's here where the Sabbat comes into play. Another sect which we'll go into more detail on later, but to make that story short, the Sabbat have a ritual where they can make a communal blood bond which shatters all other blood bonds. So Kevin joins and undergoes this rite, escaping the pyramid, the Tremere, and the Camarilla. His life from there has mostly just been him on the run, hiding from both and fighting with other sects, until he ran into Dee in the tunnels in chapter 1. So that's his introduction, and a bit about how he ended up where he did. But what about before he was embraced? Well, Kevin was an accountant, and that's kind of it. There isn't really a ton to Kevin before he was embraced. It's a bit of a weird paradox, but this actually makes Kevin one of the most fascinating characters in the series. Let me explain. One of the best parts of World of Darkness to me are the kinds of people that it chooses to focus on when it comes to setting up a campaign. Namely, completely normal, everyday people. World of Darkness is a world of complete and utter incomprehensibility, unfathomable complexity, and absurdist madness. But it is like that for a few reasons, and one of the reasons for that is that you aren't special. This is a world of creatures of near godlike power and influence, where figures and concepts that you thought you fully understood have secret dark twists, where practically everything has a double meaning and 16 layers of complexity, with planet spirits and a dream dimension and the Fae doing whatever the buttery biscuit fuck they're doing for God knows whatever reason. Or Wales. Just in general. Look, Wales is lovely, don't get me wrong, but in World of Darkness that place is a who's who of what the hell is going on. Particularly in the north, which also happens to be home to the town of...
Stand by to push Gwingus, go get it from Drubble, Anti-Cilia, go.
Because of course it is. Suddenly Wells next to sea doesn't seem such an absurd name now, does it?
What are you fucking babbling about?
I know it seems like I'm rambling, Kevin, but I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Anyway, for all of this, whether you're a vampire, a mage, an imbued, or just some random person who learned that all the other groups existed, you have just been thrown into the middle of it all and told, alright prick, have fun figuring this out and staying alive and also sane. Even in the cases where you are playing a character where you are fully in the know right from the beginning, like a werewolf, you're not much more than a beginner. You're a small insignificant speck finding its place in the wider universe. A wider universe made up of dozens of different groups, all with their own perceptions, beliefs, terminology and goals that you just have to figure out and deal with. You are isolated in a world you don't understand, surrounded by incomprehensible horror, hostility and confusion. And Kevin represents this perfectly. He didn't know about any of this before he was embraced. He didn't know about mages or werewolves or changelings or the secret kingdoms which intersect with the world as we know it or any of this. He barely even knows that much about the history of his own clan.
Dude! I am a 27-year-old accountant turned wizard. I do not know ye old fun facties.
He had a job, an apartment, goals, dreams, all of which were robbed from him when he was embraced. And he's been dragged into a world of complicated politics, backstabbing, secrecy and concepts beyond what he thought was real. He's had to piece it together from wherever he can, from whatever he can. And he, like everyone else who learns about the shadow worlds beyond the consensus, is completely out of his depth. He's just a random guy. Like I said, when it comes to Kevin's backstory, him being an accountant is kind of it, but that's not to say that there isn't more to him. When you put together his life and his own perspective on it, he becomes a very understandable, sympathetic and tragic character. I did this before with my analysis of Dee, and I don't particularly like the thought of doing the exact same thing again here, but I cannot stress this enough. I do not think that it is possible to fully convey just how human this vampire wizard is without playing his parable from the probing of Kevin in full. At the very least, I know that I do not have the words to fully convey how much this speech humanizes him. So, for lack of a better alternative, let's have a look at a parable.
A parable about one named Kevin Westworth. Kevin was born in Ipswich to a middle-class family. His parents were devout followers of the status quo and primed him with all the tools necessary to lead a pleasant, stagnant, unexceptional life. Kevin became an accountant, about the only field in which he truly excelled. But his dream was always to accomplish something more. So he broke away from his life in the suburbs, moved a bit further north. He decided he will make it big. He will do something with his life. He failed. And so, Kevin got a job as an accountant in Great Yarmouth. But Kevin never gave up. Don't you understand? Kevin may have been trapped in the mire. He may have been an uninspiring person trapped in a dead-end job. His dreams and aspirations might have been dying, but they weren't dead. Not completely. He was going to make his name. He was going to make rent every week. He was going to move up, see the world. He was going to do something, anything, to make people know his name. And then Kevin died. And now you know the rest.
Well, perhaps I know a part, but neither of us know the ending.
Spare me your optimism! It was stolen from me along with my life. You cannot know the feeling of the embrace. To wake one day, your skin cold, your heart still, ravenous, inhuman. But once there was a world, friends, colleagues. Now there is only prey and treachery. This story comes to no good end. I cannot follow my dreams. I must scrounge to stay alive or sane. I cannot remain human any longer. My only hope is to embrace a shadow of this dream. To embrace the beast. And hope freedom is on the other side.
Freedom never comes through surrender.
Perhaps not. That's the only chance I have left.
This right here is why Kevin works. Even to someone who knows next to nothing about World of Darkness and only knew Hunter the Parenting as a show about vampire hunters, this alone elevates the series from a mindless monster hunting series into something with far greater depth, and turns Kevin from the haha funny wizard into a real person. And in doing so, shows just how vampirism is a curse, and what that curse does to people. Kevin's parable is sad, it's depressing, and it's relatable. What he chooses to talk about the most is what he's lost ever since he became a vampire. It's just normal everyday stuff. He doesn't just have unique problems that can only exist in this shadowy underhive. They're problems faced by everyday people. Kevin works because he's so normal. Because we're all worried about the things that Kevin worried about. Being stuck in a job he hates, not being able to accomplish any of his goals, having those plans that you never really got around to. Vampires are a tricky supernatural creature. They're capable of living for millennia and attaining many powers and abilities. On the surface, vampirism doesn't seem like too bad a deal, but it comes with a great number of caveats. For example, vampires can't withstand the sun at all. They have to be active at night, whereas humanity are mostly diurnal. They can operate both in the day and at night. Vampires gain access to supernatural abilities, but all humans are either sleeper mages or awakened mages, fully capable of learning magics that vastly overpower the vampires. Vampires can only consume blood and occasionally flesh from humans, thus making them vital to their survival, whereas humanity are fully capable of surviving without vampires. Each progressive generation of vampires gets weaker, while each generation of humans enters a more and more technologically and socially adapted civilization. Despite its immediate appeal, vampirism is a curse upon those that are infected with it, because ultimately, being a vampire puts an incredible number of restrictions on you in exchange for a few perks. And while humanity doesn't get those perks, they get to be free. And this dynamic is what Kevin embodies perfectly, because vampirism took that away from him, and he hates it. And he wants that life back, because despite all of its many flaws, living as a human is preferable to living like a vampire, where he can't enjoy a bagel or a sunrise, or just enjoy a conversation with a friend because he can't be sure that they won't stab him in the back in order to climb to power in a ruthless hierarchy, or even just have control over his own thoughts. And if his parable demonstrates anything, it's that the one thing Kevin values more than anything in the world is that freedom that he lost. Yet Kevin never gave up. Perhaps that's the most admirable thing about him. Thrown into a world that is well beyond his grasping after having his previous life and everything else taken from him, he keeps trying. He keeps doing everything that he can to make something out of the situation he's in. He's a persistent bastard. It's hard to hear about his life and all he's been through and not want him to just get that one win. Perhaps that's part of what makes his alliance with Dee so appealing. To get along, they argue in the way that only people who get along can, and he does so of his own free will. It's like he's gotten back just a sliver of the humanity he felt he lost. And perhaps that's what makes his turning away from the Sabbat so deeply fulfilling. Because it makes you think that maybe Dee is right, that he can claw his way out from this. And if Kevin can do that, so can other vampires. And that is one way of viewing Kevin. I actually have two different ways of looking at him, and I hold both of them at the same time. And to understand the second perspective, we need to understand the Sabbat, which means it's time to talk about how the Sabbat are fascists. So World of Darkness and Hunt the Parenting are pretty brazenly open with the fact that the Sabbat are fascists. In Chapter 2, If the Vampires Had a Tortured Wrestling Match, Marcus explicitly refers to them as such. So, disagree with my thesis now, dickheads. But okay, I'll do my job. To back that up, we need to know exactly what fascism is. To do that, we're going to have to go over the definition of fascism. That is a problem, because fascism is an inherently inconsistent ideology that has manifested itself in incredibly different ways every time it's cropped up. It isn't really one ideology of consistent belief, but rather a mishmash of different beliefs, many of which are contradictory. Basically, it's vibes-based. So for the purposes of analysis, the easiest way I can think to do this would be to go over the essentials of what a fascist society would look like. Then we're going to compare and contrast that against the Sabbat. Once we've established this, we can start to go over this secondary perspective on Kevin, because establishing the political undertones of the Sabbat is key to understanding that. So, to put it in the broadest series of terms possible, fascism is an authoritarian, hierarchical ideology. It is exclusionary, and will usually seek to empower one group above all others. And that group can be very broad. It can be anyone inside a given territory, or it can be very narrow, such as people that are within a certain culture or an ethnic group, or both, but it is by definition exclusionary of anyone not a part of it. It has strict authoritarian control, which suppresses all opposition. It regards those who act against their interests either as the enemy or as traitors. It will often levy fear of other groups as a justification for crackdowns, preemptive invasions, and the removal of, quote, undesirables. As a subcategory of these 2 points, despite being, obviously the ones doing the whole persecuting thing, most fascists will view themselves as the ones being persecuted, or their actions as being a justified response to it. Fascism demands a strict social hierarchy, usually based on what it perceives to be natural distinctions between different groups of people. To put it simply, it has an extremely strong emphasis on what people should be, as opposed to giving them the freedom to decide what to be for themselves. In short, it suppresses the liberty of the individual in the name of the group or territory it rules over, and it often appeals to a mythologized past and a return to it. For example, Italy was a country run by fascists in 1922. Italy was historically the home of the Roman Empire, which these fascists sought to rebuild in their time. Also, they're militaristic. I probably should have opened with that in hindsight. I could go far more in depth, but none of that would be particularly relevant to what we're talking about here. This is basically all the information that we're going to need. So, now that we have a rough idea on the basics of fascism, let's go over the Sabbat. Some of the more surface level things we'll get out of the way quickly. The pack is clearly hierarchical. When Pyotr, the leader of the group, tells Abe to shut up, he shuts up, even though he's clearly not happy about it. They've made it clear that they're more than happy to use force to achieve all their aims, which we'll be going into shortly, and actively use force against the Camarilla, which stands in the way of them being able to actually do any of this. Like a pro old man here goes off on a rant about how vampires are persecuted by the refusal of humanity to bow down to their, quote, betters. When attempting to coax the family into joining them and becoming vampires, one of Pyotr's points is that they would get to experience supremacy over other humans. Ape in particular keeps going on about living as their forefathers did, referencing a great past. Perhaps one of the only ways in which the analogy breaks down here is that in World of Darkness, the imagined past that they're referring to is actually real in the forms of the first and second cities, which were basically vampire-run god kingdoms. But I mean, that doesn't exactly make them less fascist. The Roman Empire did in fact exist. That didn't make Italy less fascist. So, moving on to the deeper stuff, the ultimate goal of the Sabbat is to do away with the masquerade and rule humanity openly as vampires. Pyotr puts it best when he says,
"Your kind are just livestock. That's it. That's just the way of things. No matter what you do, mortals are just meat."
We have a pretty clear in-group, out-group dynamic going on here, along the lines of humans and vampires. Pyotr even goes as far as to say,
"We are Cainite naturalists."
referencing the perceived naturalistic hierarchy that the Sabbat sees between humans and vampires. And if that wasn't enough, he also says directly that the Sabbat's cause is,
"We're on a warpath, and our cause? To see you lowly, juicy apes serve your natural purpose."
and a bunch of other references to politics keep cropping up. Kitson even goes as far as to basically spell it out, when he refers to the sects as political parties, and any doubts about this should be quashed when Kitten spells out...
Right, so, as has been made abundantly clear, you are basically vampire supremacists.
Within Chapter 2, the themes of politics, natural hierarchies, and the relationship between humans and vampires is repeated again and again and again. I counted no fewer than 3 explicitly political terms, and 8 other times words usually associated with politics were used, including serfdom, censorship, and slavery throughout. And I was limiting myself to terms that were near exclusively politically charged. If I opened up the qualifying words to include things like the word supremacy, it might have been more akin to 20. Most of that scene really is political exposition on how the vampire underworld operates, and this is a series which is extremely careful and precise about the words that it uses by dropping hints through using specific terminology or letting the lack of wording speak just as much as the spoken lines. An entire audio log is dedicated to this concept. All of this suggests to me that the constant references to politics and philosophy are very much intentional and not just ha funny political science joke. Although it was also a funny political science joke, which is one of the strengths of this team's writing ability while we're on the subject. They're very good at mixing in thematic through lines and important information with more comedic lines. Based on all of this and everything else that we know about them, I think it's pretty safe to call the Sabbat a fascist sect. So, back to Kevin. Where does he fit into all of this? Does he believe in the Sabbat's goals and ideals? Not really, no. This is another one of the ironies of Kevin's character. He works alongside the Sabbat, but he doesn't really believe in their cause. During his initial introductions, Kevin talks like he's a full-blown believer in the Sabbat Crusade. He says all the things that they expect their members to say. He refers to himself as a Wizard of Cain, about how he's far more than a mere mortal, how he despises the Masquerade, and how good all of that feels, but he frequently displays behaviors and attitudes that are fundamentally incompatible with the Sabbat's worldview. For example, he has a cat.
Oh no, I told the ape it, Mr. Smurples!
He reveals to Dee that he has a number of ties which remain to his human life. He still owns his apartment, he's still on the papers, and he'll even pretend to be alive to make sure that he isn't reported as missing. Dee will often make comments that are based far more on his ideals of what humanity is capable of, rather than the state that it's currently in. Those ramblings are one of the reasons that I adore Dee, in case you were wondering. A recurring joke throughout Arc 1 is about Dee acquiring a new blender for 99p. Within the context of his interrogation of Kevin, he also goes on about disliking vegetables or taxes, but Kevin will argue with him on each aspect of it whenever it comes up, calling him ridiculous, absurd, or insulting Dee by calling him a child. The human is railing against civilization, while the vampire defends it. And while hilarious, it also showcases the cracks in Kevin's facade. Maintaining the illusion that he's still a normal person by pretending to be alive, one could argue is him upholding the Masquerade, or at the very least, it's him trying to keep his comrades out of trouble. But it should make no difference to Kevin how human society operates outside of that. He's part of the Sabbat. They don't care about how human civilization is now, they seek to replace it with their own version. All of these combined are completely at odds with Sabbat philosophy. Kevin even mentions that it's likely his packmates would eat him if they knew like a tenth of this. And it's worth noting, this is all before he ever meets Dee. He was doing this long before he encountered the family of hunters. He didn't need to be convinced to do any of this, meaning that this lack of true belief was the case long before he encountered the hunters. So that raises the question of what he was even doing with the Sabbat in the first place. It's obvious he doesn't really believe in their cause, so why was he with them at all? In a word, desperation.
How would you know this?
Hopelessness is another reoccurring theme throughout World of Darkness. The powers that be are so powerful that there aren't even enough words in any language that has, does, or ever will exist that can properly convey it. But they do have limits. It is, in theory, possible to overcome them. Yet, even if those powers were defeated, for a lot of people in these settings, nothing would change. Even if the vampire clans, their leaders, and the antediluvians were all burned away, the vampires would still be vampires. It wouldn't free them from their burdens. The odds are ever stacked against anyone in this world, in like 6 different ways, from their loss of the connections and social structures they had before, to the conflicts within their own groups and with other groups, to their low chances of survival in the first place, and their constantly at-risk humanity. The odds are constantly stacked against most people. Even though there are ways to improve things for them in a genuinely meaningful way, very few of them know about any of these. Hopelessness is a very easy thing to let seep in, and for Kevin it is particularly pronounced. But similar to Dee, that sense of hopelessness in the world is part of what makes Kevin work so well. I think to understand the sheer degree of his desperation, it would be a good idea to go through his history again, and this time when we hit an organisation, let's remind ourselves of what we know about each of them. We know that Kevin was originally part of the Camarilla by virtue of being embraced into the clan Tremere. He was brought into the fold specifically because he worked as an accountant. His understanding of numbers, resources, and the requirements needed for maintaining the Masquerade was seen as an incredibly valuable set of tools for their cause, at first. There's actually an interesting bit of foreshadowing in Chapter 1 where, throughout the early part of the chapter, we learn that the family are on the trail of a bunch of missing persons reports local to the area. When they find the vampires, Kevin berates another member of the pack, saying that his overfeeding had lured the hunters to them. This is actually an economic argument, only using a different type of resource. Being an accountant basically boils down to resource management, where to get resources, where they need to go, and the most effective use of them. For vampires, humanity is a food source and therefore a resource. If too many people go missing in one area in a short amount of time, eventually, someone who knows about vampires will notice, and eventually, one of them will come to the conclusion that a pack of vampires is involved and come and deal with it. On a long enough time frame, this is pretty much a guarantee. Kevin's advice was to not do this, which is promptly ignored.
There's no such thing as overfeeding.
And the family found the tunnel, so his assessment was obviously correct. This actually reflects Kevin's issues with the Camarilla. He gives advice to the region that mind controlling or blood bonding their subjects only works so long as they have the necessary resources. at which point they either starve to death or someone runs the numbers and finds out that theirs don't make any sense.
Everything must add up or you will be subtracted from the equation.
In both situations, despite being evidently correct, he is completely ignored. No wonder he's frustrated. Kevin also mentions how the clan Tremere aren't trusted within the Camarilla broadly. The long story short there is the House of Tremere started as mages who willingly turned to vampirism in an attempt to gain immortality while maintaining their magic. It didn't go too well. As a result, not a lot of vampires are sure what to make of them. So he's stuck in a situation where he's been essentially abandoned because he was good at the job he was embraced to do in the first place, and stuck in a clan which no one outside of wants anything to do with. And on top of that, he's still suffering from the blood bond. The Camarilla is a society that refuses to change or adapt to the needs of its people. It's a society that is stagnating, for essentially no good reason other than the people at the top have decided that they like the status quo exactly as it is. Either because they're too old to understand how the new era works, willful ignorance, a lack of flexibility, comfort with their positions of power, a belief that no one can challenge them, or some combination of all of these factors. When you have a society like that, which just refuses to change how it operates because that's just the way it's always been, or because it benefits those at the top, you get people who will adopt far more radical outlooks on things. Why wouldn't they? They're not being given any other choice. There's a quote that I like that sums up this situation perfectly, by John F. Kennedy of all people. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Within the world of darkness, this very frustration and inability to allow for a peaceful change is how the Sabbat and the Anarchs first came into being. So again, Kevin was more or less thrown aside by his sire and regent. He's been removed from any support structures that he may have had in the human world, and because he did his job well but his masters didn't like the answers he gave, he was removed from any support structures he may have had within his clan. And because his clan is distrusted, he didn't have any real support structures within the Camarilla either. And all of this is on top of the fact that he's still blood bonded, but he also says he was encouraged to deepen it. Blood bonding works in 3 stages. The first time they develop strong feelings towards their regent, the second time they become a deeply important person to the thrall, and the third, they are completely under the spell of their regent. And it's also worth noting, abandoned vampires are the absolute dredges of vampiric society. They are not treated well, and anyone can do basically anything to them without consequence. He's basically being forced to choose between being abandoned by his clan or to become more of a committed slave, while still being self-aware enough that he understands the choice he's being offered. Kevin is completely on his own. Entirely isolated, abandoned with next to no alternatives left. Enter the Sabbat, who offer him a way out, an alternative of any sort. The Vaulderie offered him a way to break the blood bond and free himself of his clan's influence, and presumably they offer him all the things that Pyotr offered the Hunters, supremacy and a new family. In Kevin's mind, what else can he even do here? He did everything he was supposed to do, and he did it well. He was good at it, but he got nothing for it and was threatened with far worse outcomes unless he just accepted it and obeyed. So Kevin joined the Sabbat out of utter frustration, abandonment, and above all, desperation. Of course he did. This is perhaps the one difference between the Sabbat and real-world fascism. The Sabbat actually did help Kevin break free from the Tremere Pyramid. In reality, fascism doesn't help anyone.
That makes you into an asshole.
Oh, hello, Emperor, from If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device, the series which predated Hunter the Parenting. Nice to see you. I was kind of hoping that we could go one analysis without having to refer back to you, since I feel that constantly referring HTTP to TTS does HTTP a massive disservice due to the implied absolute refusal to see HTTP as its own unique series distinct from you. But goddamn if your line here wasn't perfect. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there and I went a little bit lightheaded, but lost my train of thought. Something Etero Dominatus.
I was telling you my pyramid story, remember?
Right, Kevin is a member of the Sabbat.
Tail-weaving recommences!
As we've established, Kevin doesn't really affiliate with the Sabbat all that much. And having heard all the ways that Kevin was treated while he was with the Camarilla, and the many ways in which he still has ties to his human life, he calls Kevin on the main reason he even stays with them.
Let me ask you a serious question. Did you join the Sabbat to experience liberation, freedom, vampiric supremacy? Or did you join because you felt it was your only way out?
Kevin isn't with the Sabbat because he aligns with their goals. In fact, he doesn't truly align with a single one of the Sabbat's principles. If anything, Kevin seems more like he would share beliefs with the Anarchs, but they didn't have the Vaulderie, so they couldn't free him, and also the Anarchs are a squabbling mess. He's only with the Sabbat because he doesn't think he has any alternative. He can't live as a human, he isn't welcome in the Camarilla, and he isn't liked within his clan. Kevin is in a lot of ways a victim in all of this. He didn't choose to be embraced, he doesn't like living as a vampire, and his only hope for salvation is the side of a bunch of people he doesn't even share an ideology with. And any attempt to find an alternative is thwarted by the fact that for reasons completely beyond his control, vampiric society doesn't trust his clan. He's a victim of both vampirism and of the society that vampires have made, with their own clan prejudices and power structures. And he seems to know that too. It's no wonder that he came to believe that his only real hope of attaining freedom was to go along with the Sabbat, to embrace the beast and just hope that maybe he'll get something even akin to what he sought after in his human life. But he wouldn't. In an abstract sense, if he acted more and more like a monster like Piotr did, it would spell his end at the hand of the Hunters, or in the conflict with the Camarilla. If he took this to its literal conclusion, another aspect of vampire lore is that when a vampire embraces the beast, as it were, they undergo something called a wosil, a final frenzy where they become a wight, which is the beast within themselves. Their minds are permanently handed over to their instincts. They, themselves, are lost and can't be retrieved again. They're too far gone. At that point, the only thing that you can do is put them out of their misery. The only shot at freeing Kevin would be if the Sabbat won, but as we see in Chapter 2, they'll turn on one another eventually. Of course they will. Their entire ideology boils down to social Darwinism, who can come out on top. Kevin even mentions that it's likely that without the Vaulderie, it's likely packs would tear each other to shreds. Going down this route would only hurt or even end Kevin. In the same way that authoritarians promise freedom for those it deigns as its in-group, so long as they surrender their liberty, their freedom, and their minds to the state. In the end, it only ends up harming and destroying those who adhere to it, either because of outside influences or because without an external threat, they turn on one another. Dee put it best: freedom never comes through surrender. It comes from rejecting both the Camarilla, a stagnant society that abandoned him, and the Sabbat, a bunch of tiki torch-bearing sociopaths who offer a solution that doesn't even solve anything, and finding a new path to be something other than the monster that Kevin has convinced himself he has to become. Kevin and Dee's conversation is a great back and forth, but one of the more interesting things about it is when you look at it through a more socio-political lens, their talk essentially boils down to Dee doing his best to de-radicalize Kevin, to give him an out, to say to him that he isn't too far gone yet, that he can still change course, to give him something else that he can fight for. Something that Dee understands about doing that is that you can't force someone to change their beliefs. All you can really do at the end of the day is try to put them in the right environment, give them the tools, the information, the arguments, and the opportunity so that they change their minds on their own. It doesn't always work. There are many times where it doesn't, where your only option left is to fight against the threat. But you can and should try to make every effort to save people from those self-destructive mindsets. But sometimes the harsh reality is that you can't. Dee knows that too. That's what he expected to happen at the end of the probing of Kevin. But Kevin didn't go down that path. Even after Dee has told him about his plans on confronting the first vampire, a literally immortal, unkillable beast, or at least wiping out the third generation, Kevin still takes him up on the offer. Kevin is fully aware that Dee is charging headfirst into an absurd goal, but he still opts to join him. This may well have been the first real choice that Kevin made since he became a vampire. He didn't choose to become one, he didn't choose his clan, he didn't choose his sect, and his reasons for joining the Sabbat were because he didn't have any alternatives. But here, he made a choice, a real one, and that choice was to reject the hand that he had been dealt. One of my favourite visual cues of this audio log as well. Throughout the entire thing, Kevin has been in the shadows of cell bars in his interrogation room, and after Dee's speech, those shadows are no longer on him. Dee opens the door. He's convinced Kevin. He's no longer a prisoner of his own mind or circumstances. He's been pulled into the metaphorical light. Dee is an optimist, and I think deep down, Kevin is too. He never gave up on his dreams, he kept working hard, he kept trying to make something of his life, and when offered the chance to join Dee to do something better than wasting away into a stew of beastdom that is his curse, he takes it. In this perspective of mine, Kevin is someone who fell into a self-destructive fascist movement, not because he was motivated purely by anger or bitterness or hatred, although he certainly felt all of those things, but his main reason was because he was frustrated with the wider world, abandoned by those at its head, and because those who control the mechanisms that could see it change have no desire to see that change. He was stuck with no real options, other than giving up what little freedom he had left or being abandoned completely in a world he knew little about. He felt he had no choice if he wanted to see something change, to even have a shot at living the life he wanted to. But then he was given the option of something else, something better, and went for it. Kevin fell into all of this, sure, but now, given the chance, he's doing his best to work towards something better. Because underneath all of that, he isn't an evil man. Within Kevin, a human heart still beats. And with that, I think we can start to wrap this up. Would you believe me if I said that when I first started making this, I was struggling to come up with things to say? Look at us now, huh? Kevin is a complex character in a lot of ways. He's a funny vampire wizard, but he's also a deeply sympathetic person. Alpha Buser and Ogre Poppanong, broadly, are so good at what they do, because even when they're making the ha-ha funnies, they're never sacrificing storytelling or theme or character. They incorporate it into what they're doing. Kevin is probably their best incarnation of this method. Hilarious on his own, but his existence says something deeper and is contrasted with the rest of the cast. But if I had to pick my absolute favourite thing about Kevin, he's an example of positive change. I've repeated this point so many times that I feel like a broken record, but I don't think it's possible to overstate it enough. World of Darkness is brutal. Between the worm, the vampires, demons and angels, the technocratic union and everything else, it truly is a world of darkness, both in how grim the world is, and dark in the sense that there seems like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And yet, Kevin is still standing, and he's proof that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Or at the very least, that the fight to reach the end of the tunnel is a fight worth having. Whatever the Sabbat are, they are far from a good group by any stretch of the imagination, but nor is the Camarilla or much of vampiric society. Sometimes the only good option is to find something new. But whatever the case is, what is undeniable is that Kevin was a man who came close to the edge of genuine despair. Things got genuinely bad for him, and he was on the urge of going down a path of no return. In a world like the World of Darkness, trying to maintain one's humanity or sense of optimism can feel daunting. It can be depressing, it can leave you feel like an idiot for even trying. It can be so easy to fall into that darkness. But no one has to be the monster that they've convinced themselves that they are. The world can be dark, but it can still change. But even if it couldn't, you can. You don't have to give up on yourself. Sometimes you can just find something that works for you, and maybe that's enough. You can fall into the absolute depths, but it's never too late to pull yourself out from it. Freedom, hope, and optimism still exist no matter how bleak things get. So long as you choose to, you can claw your way out from the darkness and find a new path. You need only rise and take it. And that is why I adore him, because he did. He's a beacon of what never giving up looks like in this world of darkness. He is truly the great and mighty Kevin. I always suck at how to end these things. Oh, thank God, sweet release.
Single remaining Kevin plushie in the next 2 days. You will not be able to stop me